Someone has a phone out, someone's recording for YouTube or TikTok. Kindness has become clips. Generosity has become reels. And ministry has become something that we post about. One of the most impactful ministry moments I ever had, and almost no one saw it happen. I mean, there was no photos, there was no social media posts, no recognition from the stage or from others. It was just a student and a seat in the stands. Hey, I'm Josh, and this is Beyond the Numbers. This podcast exists to have real and raw conversations about what health should actually look like within our churches and within our ministries. And if this is your first time here, like, follow, subscribe. Make sure that you're checking out these videos and then sharing them with others so that we can make sure that other ministry leaders, others who need to hear it, can get these stories coming across their feeds as well. Before I was ever a pastor, at least by title, I was just a volunteer. And in the youth ministry that I grew up in and worked in, there was one student in our group that really stuck out. He stuck out because every week he would ask or beg the same thing. Hey, I got a baseball game this week. Can you come out? And he would say that to the youth pastor, and he would say that to just about every youth leader, older student that was there. And each time he was kind of met with the same thing. Silence. Now, it's not that anyone meant to ignore him or leave him out or didn't want to come to his games, but it was just in a larger youth group sometimes there's so much noise. There's so many distractions, so much energy. And sometimes there's so much that people are begging for attention that others can get lost in between those cracks. And he was one of them. But it just so happened one day I got off of work early. I was bored. And so I looked at my watch and was like, what am I going to do? And then it dawned on me, he had this game that he was constantly begging people to come out to. And so I was free, and I went. Sometimes there are certain moments that stick out in your head, and I remember showing up there feeling awkward. It was one of the first times that I had done this. I was a newer volunteer, but I still remember the smell of the freshly cut grass, the sound of the bats hitting the ball, and that weird creak of the stands as you're climbing in and you feel like everyone's looking at you because you're like, no, I swear one of those kids is, he goes to my youth group and stuff. But I sat there anyway, watched him. And at first, he didn't even know that I was there. And then one inning, he's in the outfield, and you can just see the connection and then the shift in his attitude. He knew that I was there to watch his game. So I sat there in the stands and I cheered, I hollered, I clapped, I got all excited every time he was up to bat, every time he did an amazing play. And then after we met up, took him and a few other people out for ice cream. And that was it. It was simple. Almost too simple, and yet, for that student, it was everything. In fact, that one time of showing up to his game was a moment that would then lead into years of me mentoring the student. And do you know, in that moment, showing up to that game, how many likes I got? Okay, social media wasn't that big of a thing back then. But I got none. 0. Why? Because it was an invisible ministry. It was the quiet ones. That moment where no one else knows what you're doing, and yet you do it because that is what you are called to do. And while it doesn't get the biggest promotion, and while it doesn't look the flashiest, invisible ministry is the kind that actually lasts. Today, I want to dive into the topic that sometimes gets ignored: the quiet ministry, the things that are done without the recognition, without the notice. Because if we're honest, that's like 90% of our ministry. Not for the clicks, not for the glory, but for God's glory. Because we live in a world that doesn't value invisible anymore. Everything has to be content. Everything. I mean, you go into any type of place, Disney all the time. You go down the store to the grocery store. Someone has a phone out. Someone's recording for YouTube or TikTok. Kindness has become clips. Generosity has become reels. And ministry has become something that we post about. And for me, I've wrestled with this tension for a long time. I remember in one of my first full-time roles during a yearly evaluation, the one piece of criticism, if you can call it that the pastor gave was, "Josh, you don't promote yourself enough." Now, there was nothing wrong with that. It's a true statement. See, I was focused on pouring into students. I was focused on wanting them to grow and wanting to disciple them, to raise up leaders, to build a better system within our church and within our ministry, ministering to the schools around us. Those things were really great. But then there was a level that people in the church didn't even know what was happening. Because I would do that stuff and do it quietly, and they were lost going, well, what's happening in our youth ministry? There's a weird sense of balance sometimes that we have to deal with. That promotion. But then sometimes that promotion can become our everything, where we do ministry in the different aspects of it for the attention. And if we feel like we're not getting enough of it, well, then is it even worth it? Last season, we dove kind of into this topic where you see other ministries online. You see their big moments, their big events, their highlight reels. And we start to compare and start to wonder, well, am I doing this wrong? Because I'm not getting the glory. I'm not getting the lights. I'm not getting the clicks or the follows. What I'm doing is more behind the scenes. Can I tell you, those behind the scenes and sometimes those simple things make a bigger impact? For me, for years, my Sunday mornings looked the same. The main service would end, and me and my wife would stay. She'd grab lunch, come back, we'd eat together, and then I would spend the next hour or two tearing down the entire main sanctuary, just to rebuild it into our youth room. I'd have to move around chairs. I'd haul equipment. I had to reset everything, setting up new backdrops, making sure the slides were set. And can I tell you, in those moments, there was no team, no spotlight, just me. And do you know who knew that I was doing that? Me, my wife, and God. Students would show up and it would be the youth room for them, not knowing what I went through to get it there. And the truth is, if you're a leader and you're watching this and you feel like you're working in the shadows, like your efforts go unnoticed because it doesn't get the glory, hear me. Don't judge your calling by who noticed that you did it. Because real ministry, the kind that actually changes people, often it doesn't happen on the stages. It happens in the moments when we least expect it. Many decades ago, I got woken up at 2:30 in the morning. Phone call. It must have been a God thing that I woke up, because typically I would have slept through it. But there was another student on the other end. They admitted that them and others had been drinking. And then after drinking, they decided to race. And one student in particular lost control of their vehicle and ran it into a cement pole. It split their car literally in half. And they were calling and begging for me to come and do something because they were at the hospital and the doctors were giving this kid a 15% chance of making it. Me and my wife got everything together and rushed out to the hospital as quickly as possible. And there are moments that are kind of engraved into your head. I remember walking through the hospital halls, and in that moment, fear hit me because I don't know where this student is. And honestly, I don't know what to say. I mean, yes, it is completely relying on God, and that's what it was. But in that moment, I'm like, I don't have the answers to tell these students, and I don't have the answers to tell this student or his family. And then you walk into the room and the smell of everything being sterile hits you, and the light is so bright. And here is a student that maybe just a day or so ago was sitting within your ministry, and now there's just tubes everywhere. In a coma. Machines beeping and making all of these weird noises, and the sounds are overwhelming, and yet there's this awkward, weird, scary silence. And in that moment, it was only the parents and myself and my wife that were allowed into the room. And so, luckily, God showed up because I didn't have the answers for them. But I talked with the parents, cried with them. I prayed over that boy's body and over him. Went out into the waiting room and had students that were crying. And as they were nursing off their hangovers, I talked with them and just let them vent. And in that moment, there were no cameras. There were no posts, no updates. It was just a shepherd standing in the dark. The quiet moments, the ones that change everything, aren't always about the spotlight. That student lived, and for him, that moment became a turning point in his life. But for all the time that we spend on sermons and on teachings and on hangouts and everything like that, and I'm not saying that those things are bad. Those things are great. Those are part of relational ministry. In the end, it wasn't because of one of my sermons that changed his life or those other students' lives. It was because of our presence. It was because of the ministry that didn't get noticed. It was because of the enactment of everything that we had preached about being lived out within our lives, not for the glory, not for satisfaction, not for the limelight, but because that's what ministry is. And if you look in the scriptures, especially all throughout the Gospels, this is the model that Jesus gave us. In fact, if we go to John chapter 4, starting in verse 4, he's on this trip to Samaria or through Samaria. And it says this in verse 4, he had to go through Samaria on the way. Eventually he came to the Samaritan village of Sychar, near the field that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired from the long walk, sat wearily beside the well about noontime. Soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Please give me a drink." He was alone at the time because his disciples had gone into the village to buy some food. Now the story continues, but I want to point out something here. It says that he had to go through Samaria. Yes, talking about travel, but in the same way, if we look at what Jesus did in Samaria, there was no crowd. There was no large groups of people coming out to him. There was no spotlight. There was one interaction. It was with this woman who, for whatever reason, was coming out at noontime, one of the worst times to come out for water. And that was because she was an outcast. Their conversation goes and she reveals that her love life has not been the best. And in fact, the man that she's with now is not her husband, which in their day was more taboo than it is now. So people were avoiding her. She was probably avoiding them as well. And yet Jesus converses with her, talks to her, engages with her, answers questions about worship and about who they worship and where they should go and all that. And then he does something amazing. He reveals to her that he is the Messiah. One person, an outcast. No crowds, no applause. It was just one life. And for Jesus, that was enough. So here's my challenge for all of you this week. If no one's following you, if your name isn't being recognized, if you're the one that's moving the chairs when everyone else has gone home, keep going. Ministry isn't about the clicks. More than anything, ministry is about the transformation. And if you're helping to change lives, even one life, but it's happening in the quiet, it's happening when others aren't around, it's happening when there are no cameras, then guess what? You are still doing the work that matters. Because heaven doesn't measure ministry by views. Thank God he doesn't. It measures it in faithfulness. I want to hear from the quiet ministries. If you have a quiet ministry, if you've been pouring out, maybe you're a youth leader, a pastor, or maybe you're just someone that volunteers. What's one moment within your ministry? One seat that you sat in, one unseen act that no one else knows about. Not for the glory, but drop it in the comments. Not for the praise, but to allow us to celebrate the work that doesn't always get the headlines, doesn't always get the attention, but it's still changing lives. Now, next week, we're going to be shifting gears a bit. What happens when doing the right thing within your ministry as a leader, as a team member, you try to do your best with something, and yet even doing the right things and following the biblical examples, you still end up the villain. You still end up looking bad when you have to deal with hard situations, because we have to deal with hard situations at times. So I look forward to seeing you next week. Until then, I'm Josh, and this is Beyond the Numbers, where we work together to build not just numbers, not just platforms, but we work to change the culture and the world around us to be something that reflects more of Christ in our churches and less of ourselves. Thanks.